If you desire to walk in alignment with your purpose, to live a life of joy, abundance, and fulfillment, you've come to the right place. This is Sarah Locke, and welcome to Purpose Unlocked. Hello, everyone. If you are watching us online, you might notice that I am in my comfy girl era, and that is because I have a cold and I have had a difficult week to say the least. But that is what we are going to be talking about because I came across this verse on my feed and it was Exodus 14:14. And it is, "The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still." And I feel like this runs completely counterintuitive to the way that I live my life. If you know anything about me, if you've listened to me before, I am the person that will say, you need to do everything that you can do so that God can do what only He can do. And I think that this verse speaks to those moments where we can't do anything. There's nothing left for us to do except for be still and surrender to God and His plans for our life. So that is the moment that I reached this week. I am fighting a battle that is already won. I just don't know what the end of it looks like. I'm fighting a battle that I can't fight, really. I'm raising the white flag. I surrender. God's got to take this one. And then when I saw this verse that God will fight my battles, I need only to be still. That's what I needed to hear because He is fighting this and He's got this. So it's been a rough week, but I know that my future is in His hands. If you have had a rough week or if you've had a rough year, you might have had a rough year and it is only mid-January and you might be like, yeah, I needed that verse too. I hear you. I think, honestly, 2020, I don't want to say anything too soon, but I feel like 2026 can really only go up from here. So this might be a fantastic year. I still have hope in greater things to come.
That is good verse, but I think we should give our listeners just a little context. This verse comes at a time where Moses spoke this to the Israelites because they are trapped between the Red Sea and the advancing Egyptian army. And it was a situation that they couldn't resolve themselves. Only God can do. If God fights our battles, then what is our responsibility?
If God fights our battles, what is our responsibility? I think that's a great question. I think that gets back to what I was saying before, where I am usually the person where I'm like, if you are in a season of patience and preparing, you have to do everything that you can do so that God can do what only He can do. For example, in my fertility journey, I am very adamant about making sure that I'm eating all of the right things, that I'm going to the gym, and I try to eliminate all of the chemicals out of my life. So I use like the native brand for my shampoo and my lotions. I switched to Dazzle Dry for my nails, and they actually are staying on really well. Anyway, that's besides the point. But I, when I'm preparing for getting pregnant and the pregnancy journey and all of those things, like I make sure that I'm doing everything that I can do so that God can do what only He can do, which is put a baby in my womb and grow a healthy, beautiful baby, right? So I am doing everything that I can do so that God can do what only He can do. But there are some times in life where there's nothing else for us to do. If you are stuck between a literal sea and the army that is way bigger than you that's coming to kill you, like you are in a really bad spot. There's nothing else for you to do. So in those instances, that's when you got to be like, God's got this. And you just have to trust that He does.
And when does obedience look like movement versus stillness? The Israelites start crossing the Red Sea, and that was their movement, and that was them being obedient to God. What could that look like in our lives? Obedience versus stillness.
There's also a verse that says that in all of your ways acknowledge Him and He will make your path straight. And I think that if in everything you do, you're constantly referring back, like, all right, God, what am I supposed to do next? He'll tell you. if you're constantly in that relationship and you're having that conversation, if you're reading your Bible and you're meditating and praying on a daily basis, like God's going to make it pretty flippin' clear what's the next thing for you to do. He's not going to say, if you do this, then all of these things are going to happen in the future. He's just going to say, do this right now. This is the next step. This is the next step. And that's how he'll lead you. But sometimes you get to a point where you're caught between the sea and the army, and there's no next step. And that's when stillness is your only option. I think that most of the time, God is going to illuminate what that next step is for you. And when you feel like there's no next step, that's when you have to be still and say, all right, God, like I've done as much as I can do. I can't fight anymore. Sometimes we just don't have enough fight left in us. And that's when God steps in and says, you know what? Be still, know that I am God, and He is going to be the one to take it. And I honestly think that that is the hardest place to be in. I think it's so much easier to be moving, to have a plan, to be like, all right, action item. Because when there's something that I can be doing, that I can be preparing, that I can be making better, I feel like I have some control over the situation. And when it gets to the point where I no longer have any control, but I have to surrender to God, those are actually the hardest times. But I'll also say in those times, like when you do see God move, you know that it was him that did it. You know that it was him that like has your life in his hands and is moving things for you. And so, you know, his strength is made great in our weakness. And I'm praying that this is one of those times that he is going to show his strength in my weakness. And that this is just going to be another part of, my story that I get to share with people, that I get to have as a testimony to say, look what God did for me during this time. So I'm keeping the faith that He'll deliver me between the sea and the army, as it were.
Now, going off of the fear and control, how do fear and control interfere with trusting God to fight for us?
Well, obviously, control is not the best thing to try to have in your life because the reality of the situation is we are in control of nothing. The only thing that you have control over is your reaction to the situation. That is the only thing you have control over. So people that fly off the handle or can't control their reactions, that means that you have control of nothing because you cannot control what's happening in your life. And if you can't control your own reaction to what's happening, you have control of nothing. So I'll say that again. The only thing you can control is your reaction to the situation. Now, where does fear come into play? I heard our pastor spoke about fear and anxiety a few months ago, and it was basically the more that you trust God, the less fear you should have. And the more fear you have, the less that you're trusting God. So, in those times where you're having anxiety, you're basically saying, like, all right, God, I know that you've gotten me this far, but I'm pretty sure this is where you dip out. And if you look at it that way, it almost becomes kind of comical. That sermon that he gave, it actually did help me a little bit. I have to admit, I did have a decent amount of postpartum anxiety, and it was predominantly when I was in the car, whether I was driving, but especially when my husband was driving. And it was funny because when I thought about it that way, like, okay, God, I know you pulled me through so much and you've gotten me this far. But now that my husband is behind the wheel, like I know that this is when, you're just going to take me out. So when I looked at it that way, I was like, all right, I really do need to trust God more, especially when my husband's driving. I just need to, because it's not like he's new at driving. It's not like I've never driven in the car with him. It's just that now, after I had the baby, I had very bad postpartum anxiety about being in the car, especially when I was not the one in control of the wheel. So I just had to take a step back and be like, you know what? If I think about this logically and not what my hormones are telling me. I just need to give this to God and be like, all right, you take this anxiety because I can't deal with it anymore. But postpartum anxiety, that's a real thing.
How can we support others without stepping in to fight battles that belong to God?
I think supporting someone is going to look different for every person in every season and in every situation. So I would say supporting someone definitely means praying for them, walking alongside of them. Sometimes it just means like being physically there, just being someone to listen to, or being someone that will listen, being a sounding board. Most of the time, fighting someone else's battles for them doesn't work anyway. But giving them the encouragement and the information that will help them. One of the things, and I don't know if this helps people all that much, but I will tell you, it helps me. So I just try to pass it on. One of the things that helps me a lot is usually listening to music, particularly praise and worship music. It just, when I'm in like my worst times, I usually like there's usually a song that speaks to me specifically in that moment, and then I'll just like cling to that song. That's usually what helps me. And then when I hear someone else going through something, whether it's something similar or whether it's just something that I think that song might speak to as well, then I'll also pass along that song. If you're going through something really, really awful and you ask me for any type of advice, be prepared. There's a 99% chance that you are going to get me sending you praise and worship songs. That's how I like to support. You're either going to get praise and worship songs or you're going to get a home cooked meal. But I feel like you can't get wrong with either of those things. So that's how I support people without having to fight their battles. I hope that this helps you or resonates with you. And if you are someone that is currently going through a battle that is just way too big for you, know that I hear you and I see you and I understand you. And I am in a season myself. And just rest in the goodness that we are fighting a battle. He's already won. He's already won. And if you have gotten to the point where you can move no further, all you need is to be still and trust in him. And he is fighting that battle for you. So until next time.
Thank you for the precious gift of your time. If you found this helpful, please be sure to like, subscribe, and share with someone you love. Until next time, count your blessings, love yourself, and stay fabulous.